Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to share with you a little bit about some of the research I've been leading at CMHC over the last few years on the subject of eviction. Also keen to have a dialogue with you about how this work might be useful in the work you do in the sector. And as I will also be speaking to an active research program, learn what more can be undertaken in that program to better support the work that you do going forward. As part of our first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, I spent some amount of time better educating myself about the lives and legacies of selected historic figures, including figures from within government. One such individual was that of Dr. Peter Bryce, the medical officer of health who documented the health conditions and practices in the residential schools and made this evidence available to government in the hopes that it would bring about change and widespread reform. I also learned more about the legacy of Duncan Campbell Scott, who was a civil servant who worked in ways to prevent that evidence from ever influencing decision-making in government, and at points even interfered with Dr. Bryce's efforts to share that evidence more widely. Since that day, I've been thinking a lot about those two very different models of what it means to work in public service, and thinking a lot about the kinds of choices and decisions that we can make for those of us who work in government and who are deeply committed to effecting change. And as a researcher, thinking more specifically around things like the kinds of projects we can create, who we choose to orient our projects towards, and whose lived experiences we choose to focus on. I'm Julia Markovich. I work in research at CMHC. I'm delivering this presentation from unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and I would like to dedicate this presentation and the body of work upon which it is based to anyone, anywhere, who has ever been forced to leave their home. For the purposes of this presentation, I thought I would really focus on three main things. I'll start off by saying a few words about some foundational research that was completed and released earlier this year around the ways in which the evictions landscape in this country has been changing. And I'll also set out why I think that this matters for eviction prevention, housing policy, and tenant support. This foundational work has led to a series of spin-out projects and programs, and so I'll then speak to a newer program of research that has emerged from this foundational work and some of the main components within it. I'll then close by some discussion around our approach to disseminating findings from this program and the types of outputs that you can expect from this program, and then looking forward to an opportunity to discuss all of this work with you in the Q&A that follows. The last time CMHC had commissioned any research on the topic of evictions was a study about the costs of eviction to both tenants and landlords. And this was published a little over 15 years ago now. It was a very comprehensive effort. It's a report that's actually still widely cited to this day. But it was clear that there was need to update our understanding of this issue, understand how things may have been changing in the interim period, and what these changes might mean for the eviction prevention effort. This was a Part 9 funded project. It was undertaken by an academic team at the Institute of Urban Studies, the University of Winnipeg, and it involved undertaking interviews with tenants with lived experience of eviction, professionals who work in housing and provide supports to tenants, as well as a review of prevention programs and literature. And one of the key findings from that research effort was that the Evictions landscape in this country has been changing in two main ways. Firstly, with respect to the drivers of eviction, so the circumstances that lead to an eviction notice. And secondly, with respect to scale. The established wisdom about evictions is that they are driven by tenant-related factors. So this is the idea that there are circumstances in tenants' lives that are driving those eviction notices. And we can think of factors such as economics, or challenges around paying the rent and or utilities. We can think of behavioral and health-related factors, so things like damage to a unit or perhaps illegal or unsafe activities in a unit. By their nature, these types of eviction drivers take place at the individual scale. So, a single tenant or a household receiving a notice at one time. But what the research also revealed is that there are many other drivers of evictions that do not have anything to do with tenants or circumstances in those tenants' lives. They instead center around landlord and other types of factors. Here we can think of, for example, behavioral related factors. So if we think of, say, discrimination that is directed at individual tenants, and then that discrimination becomes bound up in a decision to evict. But here we can also recognize what are increasingly termed development-led evictions. These latter types of drivers of eviction can take place at the individual scale, but also at the scale of an entire building. So think many households receiving notices at the same time, and even at the scale of a community, if we think of, say, neighborhoods or pockets of neighborhoods, perhaps, where you have hundreds of households receiving a notice at one time. And of course, the pandemic has introduced further drivers of eviction that have increased the extent to which tenants are vulnerable to eviction, and also have implications for the scale at which evictions can take place. And this has implications for everything from our understanding of who is vulnerable to eviction, with a much broader cross-section of tenants now being vulnerable than previously perhaps understood. This has implications for the effectiveness of prevention measures, which, as the research documents, generally not oriented or accommodating these changes that I mentioned earlier. And this has implications for housing policy. So, the need for more affordable rental housing in cities across the country. And it also has implications for tenant support. So everything from support for the search for alternative housing to perhaps secure storage for belongings or help with the physical move itself. This research was also based on interviews with stakeholders in housing as well as tenants. And these interviews really confirmed that these changes have been taking place in many parts of the country. Most notably, these development-led evictions that I mentioned previously, increasing across different parts of the country, with mass evictions involving entire buildings at once, reported in cities such as Winnipeg, Vancouver, New Westminster, Kitchener-Waterloo, Hamilton, Toronto, Halifax. Housing professionals confirmed that some populations are more vulnerable to eviction. Newcomers and migrants, children and youth within families, people dealing with mental health issues or self-medicating, seniors, Indigenous people, low-income working households, gig economy workers were all cited in this regard. Lived experience interviewees also revealed how damaging the effects of eviction are for tenants. 4 of the 10 who participated in this research were evicted into homelessness, 3 of whom experienced hidden homelessness. Tenants also acknowledged the mental and physical health impacts associated with eviction, the language of trauma being repeatedly used to describe their experiences. Feelings such as exhaustion, anxiety and depression, fear and loss, feelings that can remain long after an eviction takes place, but then also complicate the ability to find suitable alternative housing. Interviews with housing stakeholders also revealed a number of other issues that require greater focus going forward. Many of these relate to issues that are also bound up in our land use planning system. And I do have a companion project on that land use planning system and how it can both help and hinder our objectives for housing. I'm happy to speak to that in the Q&A, perhaps, if you're interested. I think for the purposes of today, though, I'll just focus on a couple of items. One is that participants really stress the importance of having a lot more affordable rental housing. And this is a twofold effort involving not only building new, but also better attention paid to the retention of existing affordable housing. Data gaps on eviction were also continually cited by participants as a key barrier to more effective prevention and tenant support measures. And greater attention being paid to the impacts of eviction was another common theme in those interviews. In order to respond to the findings from this foundational work, we have created a newer program of research. This is a multi-year, 3-year program that comprises both quantitative and qualitative streams. The first is a pilot project that we are advancing with Statistics Canada, in which data from tribunals in up to 3 provinces will be collected and through Statistics Canada's linkage environment, linking those with social data to help build up a stronger, more comprehensive social portrait of the experience of eviction, looking at everything from the prevalence to the causes and the consequences of forced moves, but also being able to better understand who is experiencing these forced moves. As part of this effort, we're also engaging in conversations with StatsCan to introduce some additional questions into the next Canadian Housing Survey. This is a survey that goes out every couple of years to a sample of households and an opportunity to strengthen the section there around forced moves or eviction. This program of research also has a rather unique governance model in the form of a research advisory committee. This is a model that I have been rolling out across several projects now at CMHC. In addition to the core project team, there will be a number of members in this committee from within CMHC, but also the federal family. So the National Housing Council, for example, will be represented here. We're also extending an invitation to the Office of the Federal Housing Advocate. In addition, a number of external members will be able to be part of this committee, including the provinces who participate in the pilot. We're reaching out to representatives from municipal government and also have space for 2 further individuals with lived experience of eviction. I myself have this experience of eviction, but of course, I understand that that's not an equivalency to all other types. And so really important that we have some amount of diversity of lived experience within this committee. The second stream for this newer program is one in which additional interviews will be conducted with people who have experienced an eviction. And we're very much interested in learning more about everything from the circumstances that lead to that eviction notice, the actual forced move itself, and better understanding what happens to people following an eviction. And all of this with a view towards better supporting eviction prevention, housing policy, and tenant support. I mentioned this is a 3-year program of research, and I think one of the interesting things about it is that we're not waiting to the end of this program before we start disseminating results. We are developing a plan whereby we will be releasing in a regular, ongoing way a series of shorter and more expanded analyses. We're also exploring opportunities for bespoke research outputs that can better support those working in various aspects of the housing sector. Alongside this, we're looking at ways to disseminate findings that are perhaps a bit different from the traditional insights and reports that you might be used to from CMHC. So really keen to try to disseminate through fora such as podcasts, but also through our expert community on housing, or ECHO panel, which has been built up at CMHC now over the last couple of years. We will also be sharing research findings through the membership of our Research Advisory Committee and the network that we are building around that. So I thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about this research. I'd be delighted to hear from you if you're interested in learning more, if you would like to contribute in some way to the active program. I've enclosed my contact details here. Delighted to hear from you and really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.